gentlemen, let's get ready to rumble!
Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Political Smackdown. I'm Andy Devon. I'm your host this week. We've got our usual crew. Everybody's here back from vacation and just being lazy. And we're just glad to have everybody back on the men with us. And if you don't know them by now, shame on you is all I can tell you. All right, let's get started. Measles cases have reached a 3-decade high this year, with over 90% of those affected have not been vaccinated. With Health and Human Services Secretary Robert Kennedy Jr. mostly not in favor of any vaccines, we find ourselves at a crossroads in public health. Do we stick with a proven vaccine that is 97% effective at preventing measles, or follow the flat earth folks who think vaccines are worse than the disease? Betsy, let's start off with you. Let's face it, I don't understand somebody basically 25 years ago, they declared that we had essentially wiped out measles. Now we're having people, we actually had our first death this year in Texas from measles. I didn't even know you could die from measles, and I don't think most people did. And this was something that we really thought we had wiped out completely. And now we've got people here in our country that are actually dying from it now. I mean, I don't understand the guy who's supposed to be the standard bearer for our health in this country is telling people that he doesn't know whether you should take it or not.
And that's the major reason why so many of the Democrats opposed his appointment to that position. I mean, measles has a long history in our world. It was discovered in the 9th century, spread by trading and travelers during the Renaissance period. And it's the significant cause of childhood deaths. That it's most dangerous to babies and young children. And the vaccine has been around since 1963. And, you know, I know my children had the MMR, you know, the triple, and was the measles. And if you think back to the history of our country, when the settlers started coming to our country, so many of the Indian tribes were wiped out by the diseases they brought. Measles was one of them.
Smallpox.
And smallpox was, yes, it was. But the parents that are deciding not to vaccinate their children for measles and mumps and those regular childhood diseases are making a big mistake, in my opinion. Because if you get measles and you're not vaccinated, you know, if you're a small child or a baby, it could be deadly. And you've got, is it Texas down in the southwest that you've got so many that are ill with measles? And we had this contained. And then you could get misinformation put out about vaccines and about and scaring people. And then you've got a department head who doesn't really believe in vaccines, even though he tried to skirt around it in the hearings when he was being confirmed. But measles is a terrible disease. And I think that something needs to be done. I know he's being sued because of his wanting to weaken the vaccines and change the formula in some of the vaccines. So I just shudder to think what's down the road when it comes to measles.
Well, Mike, I know this hits home for you. You've got your daughter and grandkids in Texas, and I think your grandkids are old enough now that they're kind of like out of the woods at their age with this sort of thing, but it's still something that worries a grandfather, and I'm sure you've been concerned about it too. But, you know, this doesn't make any sense to me that we've got something in our arsenal that this wouldn't even be a concern. But we've got a gentleman that has no background in healthcare at all. He's a lawyer, an environmental lawyer at that. And he's heading up our healthcare in this country.
Well, I'm not sure why you're being so hard on RFK. He has endorsed the measles vaccine. In an NPR article in April, he said the most effective way to prevent the spread of measles is the MMR vaccine, and encouraged people to do it, and it made the anti-vaccine people mad at him.
Well, that was April.
so-
What's he saying now?
Well, he's saying the same thing. He hasn't said anything different. This was in response to the 2 deaths in Texas that you mentioned. But he has not been opposed, at least in recent times, to the measles vaccine. So that's an NPR article, Betsy. That's not exactly a right-wing place.
But has he not traditionally been opposed to vaccines in general?
He has had questions about vaccines, and a lot of this came about because of the COVID vaccines, y'all. When I took the 3rd COVID vaccine, my neck went stiff the next day and stayed stiff for a year or more. And a lot of people have had problems with that. But I'm not an anti-vaccine person. All my children were vaccinated. I was vaccinated growing up. Of course, I didn't have much choice in that. But I do understand that the issue here, at least with some experimental vaccines, I mean, I think things like polio, measles, smallpox, I mean, those have taken and saved so many people from getting those diseases. I think they're almost universally accepted. But there will be people for some kind of unusual religious reason or somebody that happened that will be opposed. So the real question is, where do parental and individual rights end and begin?
That's always the tricky part.
That's what it comes down to. And so, you know, I have mixed emotions, and they're not joy and ecstasy, as pain and agony, like the old Wide World of Sports thing was. But because I think, generally speaking, for proven vaccines that have been helpful and very, very seldom have a bad reaction in people, I don't understand why parents wouldn't generally get their children vaccinated. But RFK may be getting a little bit of a bad rap based on his own statements on that particular vaccine.
Well, Wes, I mean, I know with your libertarian leanings about freedom, and I don't understand where you're coming from, but at some point, don't we have a responsibility not only to ourselves, but to our fellow Americans to try to protect not only ourselves, but other folks too? I mean, when we have something that we know is proven to stop measles in its tracks.
Yes, Dr. Fauci.
Well, no, I'm not talking about it's something experimental. This is something that we know works.
But we were told, and that's the point. Of course, first, children should receive measles vaccines as well as a few others. But it has little to do with RFK. Measles, polio, rabies among pets were virtually gone because of these vaccines. What you're seeing now is the effect of the government not being transparent with the public, specifically, Mike, you're right, over COVID. Not long ago, Fauci told us if we got a quickly produced and largely untested COVID vaccine, we would not get COVID, but many did. Many lost their jobs because they found that the vaccine wasn't effective and refused to take it. Mask mandates, school, church, business closures would solve it. Then it was 2 vaccines, that didn't work either. Then several times a year, all made up, just like the Russian collusion story and so many other misleading, if not direct lies from Washington, and frankly, both parties are somewhat culpable. And even what you were just saying is the same thing. Fauci said this is proven, this is going to work. It didn't. It wasn't ready. So yes, get vaccines. I get a flu shot every year. It's well tested, it's proven effective, but until the government can restore some mediocre of truth with the American people, the problems like this will continue. And many people will die as a result.
But you're talking about the COVID was such a pandemic, and we were dealing with something we didn't know of. We
lied to the American people. We didn't follow the science.
We didn't know as we
right.
went through. And Dr. Fauci was the leader in trying to improve. And I took the vaccines. I had no problem with either of them, and I'll take a vaccine for COVID every time they come out. But it's like comparing apples and oranges. They're both fruits, but the measles vaccine has been safe and it's been tried and true since 1963, and children ought to get those vaccines.
And we should take it. But just because the Director of Health and Human Services, or whatever the title is, says that you got to follow the science, you have to take it or you're going to die.
Well,
You take it, you still get it, you still die,
but
then you got to have a
it as
second one.
bad. You didn't have it as bad.
Well, I
It might
think-
save you from dying.
And I can say this, I had, if you want to talk about COVID a second, I had it without the vaccine, and I have never been so sick in my life. I mean, I just never, I laid in bed and I said, Lord, please take me. I got to get out of there.
I'm not saying COVID wasn't a problem and
second
didn't need a
time-
solution.
And then the second time I had it after the COVID vaccine, and it was night and day.
But Fauci's even admitted
Well, he's
this
gone,
6
though.
foot rule was made up. It was an arbitrary number where you couldn't get
and
within 6
I
feet of each
understand
other.
what you're saying, but he's gone. And at that time, nobody knew exactly what to do with this bug. I mean, it was a hit and miss thing to try to figure it out. Now we have more information, we have more data, and now we can look at when
And
you
now,
start.
as we look at the COVID data, we realize that there were problems, and it
Yes.
should never have been pitched like that. And I'm not going to blame the American people for questioning what the government says. Measles is proven. Polio is proven. Rabies is proven. There are plenty of these that are proven. And I think it's critical to work with a trusted physician on what they think your child needs. You do your homework and you take the proper vaccinations.
Well, and I think you've hit it on the head. Talk to your doctor. And don't just go out and find something on the internet out there. You don't know where it come from. You don't know what their background is. Talk to your physician. They know you, they know your child. Make that decision based on that. And that's what worries me, folks. People go out here on the internet and you know, and like you said, do your research, but make sure you're getting somebody that really knows what they're talking about, that has background training, that it's not some nut living in their mother's basement somewhere eating Cheetos.
Or they
you know?
open the New York Times and see where Dr. Fauci was doing this research at Wuhan that caused the problem, who's now telling them you have to take a vaccine or you'll go get fired.
Now, what would y'all do if y'all didn't have Dr. Fauci?
I know.
Well, you,
Right,
what,
I've been
what
waiting
was
on
the
you, man.
woman's
I
name?
know,
West,
What's the lady's
I
name
know,
from North
Wes.
Carolina? There were dozens of them.
Wes. That's 4 Wes's.
Well, that was a call for
I thought it was worth 5.
It might have been.
Wes. Mike, you've been awful quiet over here before we leave this.
Well, I do think the government was wrong, and Fauci was the spokesman that originally told us that if you took the COVID vaccine, you would not get COVID. Then you had to have another one, then you might get it, but it wouldn't hurt you. The thing was tried in a hurry because we did have people dying from
Dying.
COVID.
Oh,
in the
yeah.
original.
Dying.
But it has soured people, and
Well,
that is just what is the
And
truth.
that's the point.
Well, but the point also
Measles.
is, I understand what you're saying, and I'm sure it has, but let's not let it get to the point that people are dying because of it.
I
And
agree.
children are dying.
And the children need a measles shot and rubella. There are
And
3 or
mumps.
4 that I think are critical. But again,
Smallpox.
the pediatrician can work with you. They're reading the journals. They're reading beyond the newspaper headlines, and they can help advise based on family history, risk, community risk, et cetera.
Yeah.
And
You're absolutely
you're so
right.
right, Andy, about staying off the internet and not believing just anything. Because you certainly can go down many rabbit holes about vaccines.
Well, and that's absolutely true, because I heard somebody somewhere said that Wes was giving hairstyling tips the other day. So,
Oh, well, on the internet.
so you
Well,
don't ever know
We'll
these
have
days.
to tune into that,
That's it.
won't we?
Well, folks, we're going to take an early break. We've kind of wore this one out, but we'll be right back with the rest of Political Smackdown.
Chef Paul Prudhomme once said, "You don't need a silver fork to eat good food." Well, on Cleveland County Kitchen, we don't have a silver fork, but we sure do serve up lots of good food. Hi, I'm Deborah Blanton. I hope you'll join me for the next Cleveland County Kitchen. Each month, we offer a complete farm-to-table experience. We visit local growers, we learn about nutrition, and wrap things up with wonderful meals prepared by our guest chefs. It's a lot of fun. I hope you'll join me for the next Cleveland County Kitchen.
And welcome back. Wes, you said you had one more thing you want to say.
Well, you cut me off a little bit talking about my hair vaccination. I used to go to the barber shop. It cost me $10 every trip. And one time I went in, and he charged me $11. I said, Steve, why are you charging me $11 for a $10 haircut? He said, I'm charging you the same thing for a haircut. The dollar's the finder's fee.
Folks, we do have fun at each other's expense at times. That was a good one.
That's a good one, Wes.
All right, well, that was such a good one. I'm going to let you go next on that one, Wes. President Trump has finally got his big, beautiful bill through Congress, just in time for July the 4th, just like he wanted. When it was all said and done and all the horse trade was finished, what did we finally end up when it was all over with, Wes? I tell you, if somebody was sitting in Congress and they did not get something in that bill for their constituents, shame on them. They probably need just to be thrown out of Congress altogether, because there was more ornaments on this more than a Christmas tree.
Well, what we got was a big, beautiful mess. Andy, you and I both worked on legislation, had to vote for it to get it passed, even though there were things that we didn't like about a bill. That's part of the way it's done. There are some good things in this bill, like funds to help round up illegals. I think that's certainly positive, but it's at a high price. $56.5 billion for a border wall. For reference, Trump's first-term border wall construction cost taxpayers $15 billion, or about $33 million per mile of border wall. So you can figure sort of how far that $56 billion is going to go. Some cuts to Medicaid, Betsy, are beneficial. If you remember, just last year, North Carolina finally signed on to the federal increase, with the feds paying 90% of the cost. We all knew that that wouldn't and couldn't last, and it didn't. By the way, over 1.2 illegals in North Carolina are receiving these undeserved benefits, along with other frauds. So it's not quite as bad as some want to make it sound. Mike, one of the worst items in the bill, again, a compromise, raises the state and local tax, which is called the SALT deduction. Essentially, this raises the deduction of federal taxes paid to state and local governments, creating an incentive for states to raise taxes. In 2030, it's expected that just that alone is going to cost every American taxpayer $900 per year. Now, while there's some good things in the bill, one writer said, it's like marveling at a newly painted rooms in a burning house. And as I've said before, it's time for Congress to do its job, and reducing the federal spending is priority number one right now.
Well, when has that ever been a priority?
It's going to have to be quickly, or we're going to be in big trouble very quickly.
I think all the deficit hawks have been taken out and shot, because we sure hadn't seen any of those anyway.
Well, we got Massey, we got Paul. They're a couple, but
They're not
we
the
got
majority.
530-something members.
That's the problem.
That's it.
the
All
problem.
right, Betsy, what's your thoughts on this?
Well, and I know that in a bill that this is big, you can find lots of different things, but it does concern me that there will be 17 million people nationwide that will lose Medicaid. The problem about making people work 80 hours a month, it's the onerous paperwork that they're going to have to send in about that. But so many of and a lot of the, you're talking about the illegals having Medicaid, like many of them are children, because they do cover children. It'll be 1.1 trillion in cuts over the next decade to Medicaid, Medicare, and Affordable Care Act. There will be thousands in North Carolina that will lose coverage, and then also they slashed the SNAP program, the food aid cuts. This is going to directly affect children with doing away with parts of the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program if you're getting food stamps. It's going to hurt my home hospital in Ashe County, a rural hospital, and other rural hospitals. It does have higher deductions for senior citizens, and it does have some good things about that. But and of course, 4 out of 5 able-bodied people on Medicaid are women, so it's directly going to affect women. And it will slash the safety nets, impacting students and low-income
Let's
people.
not say slash, because we increased it so much last year, it takes it back to a more moderate level like we had before
terminology.
Obama turned it up so high.
Terminology. To me, it's slash. You can deduct interest on auto loans now in this bill, and it did not fully eliminate taxes on tips, but it did provide some help. And so, we'll see how it goes. But the fun thing about it, the major parts about this bill about cutting, like Medicaid, will come after the next election. It will come after the next election. So we'll just have to see what DSS and what the HHS in North Carolina will do in regards to trying to help the people that they're supposed to provide for.
Well, Mike, this was the main reason why Senator Tillis said he would not vote for this bill, because of the harm it could potentially do to rural hospitals in North Carolina.
Tillis would probably make a good general election candidate for governor in 28. He's got one problem.
What's that?
Can't win a Republican primary, probably. But anyway,
But there's
as an aside.
But one other thing I was a little bit surprised at, when you cut the food stamps like this, I'm surprised that the constituency that was kind of quiet about it were the food producers. Can you imagine how much this means to, say, General Mills or Nabisco or Frito-Lay or anything like that? Because that's taking money right out of their pockets.
Well, this was a giant 945-page sausage ball. And some parts of the sausage are good premium sausage, and some of it's rot gut. And it's all mixed together depending on your point of view, which part is which. But I'll tell you all, the biggest single thing that can help us either have a softer landing recession or no recession is that the tax rates put in 2017 were extended this time permanently, and it'll take a Congress and a president to change them. It won't expire like these would have. It would have been the largest single income tax increase on the middle class in American history. Now, everybody wants to talk about the rich, but the middle class would have been hit hard, and most of us are one of those. So that part is good. And I'll just say this about the safety net. It's supposed to be a safety net, not a luxurious hammock. And that's what we have gotten to, is a luxurious hammock. And so there has to be some rationality. When John F. Kennedy was president, the vast majority of the federal budget was defense. Today, defense is hardly any percentage of the federal budget. It's all in LBJ and following Great Society type stuff that has encouraged people not to work because they can get by without it.
And debt payment.
That is a stereotype. That is a stereotype.
That is a factual
But
thing,
it's
Betsy,
just
by
like-
percentages
it's like
of the federal
saying
budget.
That poor people do not work because they're lazy. They're not. You
That's
talk
not
about
all
opportunity.
Nobody has said
Nobody's
that.
saying that.
No, but that's out there.
But we
another
have
stereotype.
encouraged people not to work. Betsy, I have dealt with tenants for years that would not better themselves because they'd lose their rent subsidy. They should be encouraged to do better.
Section 8 housing has been there, because I've dealt with it too, Betsy. But then you've also got your senior citizens that are involved in it, and then you've got ones that are disabled physically or mentally. You've got that in, and then Social Security. I mean, that was before, all the way back to FDR.
FDR.
And that has That is probably the biggest
It is.
part of it.
And somewhere I read that they were cutting like $500 million out of Medicare, even though when I was on the Hill a couple of weeks ago talking to the House members and the Senate members, they didn't know anything about that, and then it shows up.
Well, it's the social programs have really, they've helped a lot of people, but they are the most costly part of government now. And we as citizens have got to decide, we've got to give people a hand up and not a handout. And that's a well-worn phrase, but it's very factual. I think we as Americans, we are a kind-hearted people. We don't want to see anybody starve. We don't want to see anybody hurt. We want to help, but we can't continually do the way we're going because we're not going to be able to sustain it in any way, shape, or form. Well, folks, don't really have time for the third question because I know Wes is going to tee off on it and Betsy's going to be right there with him. So we may have to save that until next week. Maybe somebody can do it. But let's go to our lightning round. Mike, take off on it.
Well, on July the 9th, I believe it was, if that was yesterday, Governor Stein vetoed 3 bills, one of which was HB 96. The title of the bill was Expedited Removal of Unauthorized Persons. Andy, this would have allowed you, if you had a squatter, you would have been able to get them out quicker instead of having to go through the whole process of giving them 10 days notice, then going to court, and then they had the right of appeal, and it can take months. The reason he did it was because the Republicans added a paragraph at the end on state uniformity for operation of pet stores aimed at puppy mills and was not going to allow local governments to do it, and that's why he devised it. My point is, I hate it when a perfectly good bill that was bipartisan gets messed up by one paragraph at the end.
It happens a lot. Wes?
Well, I'll cut mine a little bit short, but again, Mike, want to thank Governor Stein's recent vetoes. Today, you can get hired solely because you're a minority, get arrested, taxpayers would have to pay for your gender transition while in prison, and then you can compete with the girls' team when released. The veto also rejected the affirmation of only 2 sexes. I wonder how many he thinks there are. Gee, thanks, Governor. What a great example to set for North Carolina. Maybe you should run for mayor of New York.
Betsy?
All right, mine is about Trump. Of course, we didn't even talk a while ago about the fact that most of all these cuts will go to the benefit of the very 0.5% and put into effect permanency to those massive tax cuts for the very wealthy. But Trump has always wanted to be nominated for the Nobel Prize for Peace. And finally, it's happened. The Prime Minister of Israel came to see him this week, and Benjamin Netanyahu, and he has submitted an application for Trump to be honored as the Nobel Prize for Peace this year.
Oh, boy. All right, well, mine's pretty interesting. Everybody knows Family Dollar stores. Leon Levine, who founded it, passed away in 2023. He left most of his wealth, which to the foundation, that with the stipulation that it had to be gone in 50 years, completely gone. Well, he had a problem. And since he's passed away, it has tripled in value to $2 billion. So now they're having to up the money they give away, so it will be gone in 50 years.
Did you bring us an application?
I know.
You're going to have to apply for yourself. Wouldn't that be a problem? Can you imagine what kind of good these people are going to be able to do? That's all the time we got this week. Hope you learned something. We'll be back again next week with a new edition of Political Smackdown.